Gotham must be destroyed. Gotham's time has come.
Of all the superheroes across DC and Marvel Comics, Batman is arguably the character who is most closely defined by the city he serves. To quote Dennis O'Neil, the infamous Gotham City is Manhattan below 14th Street at 11 minutes past midnight on the coldest night in November. This dystopia is so rife with crime that it devours its own inhabitants while spawning some of the most nefarious villains in Detective Comics. However, which vision of Gotham has depicted this city most successfully over the years? In this video, I aim to present my personal top 5 favourite versions of Gotham. In 2016's Dawn of Justice, Snyder would go against the original source material and present Gotham and Metropolis as neighbouring cities. They were only separated by a minor body of water, which allowed for the protagonists to clash upon each other's home turf. In order to distinguish the two cities, Metropolis would be represented as cosmopolitan, whilst Gotham was portrayed as a grittier town. Snyder's Gotham was depicted as having an aged beauty that was dark, damaged, and in despair. Its colour palette lacked any futuristic blue light and was grey, gunmetal, and corroded instead. This version of Gotham was dominated by a shipyard, warehouses, dark alleys, and the dilapidated homes of the destitute. Much like its citizens, this Gotham seemed abandoned. In order to present his vision, Zack Snyder used Detroit and areas of Chicago to represent much of the city. His selection of Detroit was down to its history as a major industrial city. Further to this, Detroit offered an authentic and historical old shipyard because it was part of the Great Lakes system. The hostage scene in the warehouse was built on a stage, but inspired by the interiors of the Nicholson shipyard. Alternatively, Chicago was used for the scale of its buildings, but also to add an archaic look with the old Aragon Ballroom, which was built in 1925 to represent the cinema where Bruce Wayne's parents were killed. In 2017, Snyder would go on to showcase more of this city in Justice League: Dawn of Apocalypse. I do very much like Snyder's depiction of Gotham, but unfortunately, we just do not see enough of it. Christopher Nolan's Gotham City would morph across the 3 films, but what remained consistent was the city's sense of verisimilitude. Filmed mostly in Chicago, Nolan's use of location shooting would introduce the concept of the superhero into the real world. Batman Begins is perhaps my favourite of his films, and prior to the deaths of Thomas and Martha Wayne, the newly regenerated city seems to finally be prospering under the guidance of the Wayne family. Here, Gotham is a bright, impressive and futuristic metropolis of glass and steel, rising to the heavens with Wayne Tower at its centre, suggesting the family's influence. However, Nolan's Gotham rapidly descends into urban decay after the Falcone crime family sink the city into corruption and criminality. Continuing with a sense of hyperrealism, Nolan presents audiences with a city that reminds the viewers of the Great Depression. The once brightly lit setting is now replaced with the dark, smoggy slums that seem to visually represent the city's rot through its brown and yellow colour palette. Although the skyscrapers present us with an electric urban sprawl, beneath them in the harbours, dark alleys and slums, they seem to hide Gotham's secrets and true self. In the context of post-9/11 fears, Nolan's Gotham may have suggested that the real world was terrifying enough. As a result, it could represent any modern city that could be devastated by a terrorist attack. Villains like Ra's al Ghul, the Joker and Bane all attack the city itself across the 3 films, representing the fears of a contemporary society. Ultimately, the films may have suggested that in a world where we constantly live in fear of a possible terrorist attack, Batman is the hero we need. To conclude, Nolan gave a sense of realism to a fantastic character by placing the Dark Knight against a realistic backdrop. If Batman were indeed real, Nolan's Gotham is where he would belong. The Arkham video games, including Asylum, City, Origins and Night, are amongst the greatest Batman games of all time. Part of what made this franchise so successful was its awesome depiction of Gotham City. This series created a Gotham with foreboding architecture that housed a myriad of shadows and secrets. Perpetually set at night, Gotham in these games seemed to breed insanity. The Arkham series possessed an eclectic mix of modern and archaic architecture as new buildings were built upon older structures. The city borrowed from Gothic architecture, Art Deco and brutalist designs, as well as contemporary glass and steel skyscrapers. This city was modernised further with the neon lights that were scattered across the skyline, adding a Blade Runner feel to Gotham. Batman would blend seamlessly into the city's Gothic design, hiding in plain sight amongst the many gargoyles that looked down onto the alleys that were cloaked in darkness and shadow, hiding Gotham's criminals. Reminiscent of London's Victorian arcades, the Jezebel Plaza captures Gotham's old world feel in this decrepit shopping centre. The setting and backdrops of this series are so breathtaking that you do at times pause from the game just to take it all in. On other occasions, players would take a break from the missions just to explore the magnificent and vast open world. I feel that this version of Gotham is a confluence of the best aspects of previous versions of the city. For that reason, it remains as one of my all-time favourite portrayals of the fictional city. Our next representation of Gotham City was so successful in its depiction that it not only created an iconic version of the location, but also began a unique visual style. Batman the Animated Series presented audiences with a world where modern and futuristic technology such as the Batcomputer, lasers, sputtering neon lights and the Batwing coexisted with historic artifacts such as vintage cars, Tommy guns and Zeppelins. Due to this, the series adopted a timeless old world feel that would appeal to all audiences. Paul Dini explained that his version of Gotham was set in a time where the 1939 World's Fair continued for another 60 years. As a result, this Gotham presented an Art Deco style in the 90s where you had buildings and cars anachronistically juxtaposed with computers and televisions with black and white screens. The Channing building on 42nd Street, New York was a huge influence on the background of the show, and Bruce Timm added a further film noir style to the series with the angular and stylized design. Ted Blackman would enhance the visual style by placing the action in static sets that had high contrast and silhouetted foreground elements which framed the screen. His canted angles created a sense of foreboding where the cityscape threatened to swallow its inhabitants, which was reminiscent of the German expressionist style in films like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Eric Radomski added an extra element of darkness to the designs by painting his backgrounds black and using lighter highlights for the foreground. His limited colour scheme created a dark cinematic mood with a vintage look. Ultimately, this style became known as Dark Deco, exhibiting an eclectic mix of old architecture and modern technology within a dark film noir setting. To this day, Batman the Animated Series not only remains as my favourite cartoon of all time, but also my favourite visual style for any animated series. Aside from creating an iconic version of Gotham, this show created its own visual style that has become synonymous with the Batman character. As one of the most visually distinctive directors in Hollywood, Tim Burton would work with production designer Anton Furst to create a Gotham that looked as if hell had erupted through the pavement and kept on going. In order to fulfill this vision, the two would collaborate on one of the largest and most expensive film sets, taking up 90 acres of Pinewood Film Studios. Ultimately, they would deliver audiences with a masterpiece Metropolis in 1989's Batman and 1992's Batman Returns. Their version of Gotham merged the stylized fantastical and gothic with the magnificent Art Deco. The claustrophobic skyline of futurist buildings, combined with neo-Gothic brutalism, would overwhelm the inhabitants of a city in decline. Perpetually shot at night, this city was a surrealist nightmare, with its run-down storefronts, derelict streets, and dimly lit alleyways that were teeming with creeping shadows. a labyrinth of concrete and steel with a towering cityscape that was made even more imposing by being shot through stark angles. The only illumination offered to this city was through the flickering neon lights that were scattered across the tall rooftops, revealing Gotham's former grandeur. Quintessentially, Burton's version of Gotham was a dark dystopia that was ridden with filth, smog, decay, and barely fit for human occupation. This large city seemed to hold up a broken mirror to its inhabitants, reflecting back its larger-than-life characters. In fact, this vision of Gotham was so integral to the script that it almost served as a character in its own right. Burton's Gotham, with its imposing German expressionist statues and fascist architecture, would stare down at its citizens. It has been said that Fritz Lang's 1927 dystopian film Metropolis was indeed the inspiration for Burton's Gotham, perhaps suggesting that an overseeing fascist figure is what is needed to bring order and control to a crime-ridden city after all. While some films have become bogged down with realism, Burton's Gotham remembers that this is a comic book character. As a result, this stylized world allowed the story to leap straight off the page of a comic and placed Batman within the nightmare world that he belonged. In 1990, Anton Furst's warped vision of Gotham got what it deserved as he won the Academy Award for Best Production Design. If you asked anyone to picture Gotham, I would be surprised to hear if at least elements of Burton's version did not come to mind. This Gotham became the gold standard across the entire franchise, influencing comics and the animated series, which developed the angular Art Deco style further. It is for that reason that after more than 30 years, Burton's Gotham still remains my favourite. Normally, my favourite versions of fictional text come from their original source material, which in this case would be the comics. However, with Gotham, I feel that the films and the video games have surpassed the literature. I am a huge fan of all the depictions of Gotham on this list, but I feel that without Anton Furst and Burton's version, we would not have the rest. Of course, this list was purely based on my personal preferences, so please list your own favourite versions of Gotham City in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video, then do check out my other Gotham City related uploads. Finally, thank you for watching, and please remember to like and subscribe if you'd like to subscribe. Until next time, however, it's goodbye from me.